And yeah, just to be invited back to Sheffield Sangonite to give a talk. It's a shame that I can't come in person, but you know, fingers crossed soon that will be able to happen. So yes, you've started off a series, and last week I know that Vidanya talked about seeing with new eyes, and he talked about an experience where we have a sense of something higher that attracts us, that moves us, even if we don't know why, or we can't put a label on it, or we haven't got a whole kind of metaphysical theory explaining to us why it moves us so much. We're just moved. Vidanya talked about that as, quoting Sangharakshita, is that's what is ultimate in us resonates with what is ultimate in the universe. So we have an experience where we're moved by something, we have a sense of something higher than ourselves, and we resonate with that. In Buddhism, we actually say that you can now literally have an experience where you shake with that. You shake with what is ultimate in the universe, resonating with what is ultimate in you. So I'm just going to develop that theme a little bit this evening, because this kind of experience that we can have is termed, has a special term in Buddhism, which is Shraddha, or faith. Some of you might know that word. It's quite a word we use quite a lot, actually. And it's usually, yes, translated as faith or confidence. But of course, the term faith can conjure up in our minds something that has helpful connotations, but also might have some unhelpful connotations. And in Buddhism, we mean something very, very specific by the term Shraddha, or faith. So what I'm going to do this evening is just give you a few outlines of what faith isn't, what faith is, and what characterizes faith. So the first thing that I wanted to say is that faith is not some sort of grim allegiance to an old tradition. You know, it's not that you have to have this kind of allegiance to Buddhism as such, and that's having faith in Buddhism. And then you must never, ever read another religious book. Actually, I'm sitting in my parents' front living room. And as I look around, I see sort of poetry, from Sufi poetry to Keats, John Donne, you know, the whole range there. And there's all these art books that have kind of, they have Buddhist iconography and Hindu iconography, Christian iconography. And I sort of really respect my parents for that, because particularly my father is very moved by a lot of different traditions. And so he should be, because there's things in all traditions that can move us very deeply. So faith isn't just about adhering rigidly to one doctrine or even iconography. As Vidanya talked about very fully last week, it's a kind of natural faculty that belongs to everybody, and it's a faculty because it's a natural capacity. There is something in us that responds to higher values. That's quite a strong thing to think about. It's quite a big statement, actually, to say that there is something in all of us that responds to what is higher. To respond to higher values. And there's obviously, if you're going to respond to higher values, there's an object to that. There's an object of faith, but it doesn't literally have to be confined to the Buddhist tradition. Something touches us that's good or true or beautiful. And well, there's a line from a poem by Wallace Stevens where he says, it's beyond us yet ourselves. It sort of feels like part of us. It's what is ultimate in us, responding to something much larger than us, what is ultimate in the universe. And yeah, we haven't necessarily worked it all out. We don't necessarily know why it moves us so strongly. And yet we know it deeply. It's a mystery, and yet we know it very deeply. It feels like we've always known it. It feels like we've always sort of been there. So I just thought I'd give you an example, for example, from my own experience. And there are many, many examples from my own experience. But, you know, it could be something like this, that I was not that recently, but I was in Paris and I went to an exhibition on Cubism, and there was this Picasso painting of a dancer. And as I stood there and saw this painting, I just found myself in floods of tears. And what I realized is this painting was more than a painting. It was more than Picasso's painting. It was bringing together movement and life and pointing to something far beyond itself, something almost about the human condition. And I couldn't put that into words. What I felt like was I was sort of there with Picasso watching this dancer, and that this dancer was all dancers, and all dancers were all movement of all parts of life. So it spoke to me of something more universal than even a painting by Picasso in a gallery in Paris. So there might be something like that. It might be that you're very moved by a kindness. You see a kindness in the street, and it moves you very deeply. It reminds you of the best of humanity. It might be a book, it might be a person that you respect very, very deeply, that shows you what's possible in life, or even a place that reminds you of something more than itself. I know a number of you have been on pilgrimage to India and going to some of those sites, for me particularly Shravasti, where you feel like, yes, you're in a sacred place to Buddhism, but it's also a sacred place to humanity. It whispers to you of something more universal, something limitless, something that we're not going to get to the end of, something that's timeless and true of all cultures and all places, even though it's located in a specific time, in a specific place. It speaks to you of something more. So this is the kind of faculty of faith opening up. And what Sangharakshita says about the faculty of faith is that it's based on intuition, reason, and emotion, and experience, sorry. So first of all, it's an intuition. But then we think about it, and we realize that actually there's some truth in there. It doesn't go against our reason. It doesn't suggest to us something that we find unpalatable. And our experience as well. So, for example, if you come to the Buddhist center, you might have an intuition. Actually, there's something going on here. You learn how to meditate. I mean, I definitely found this for myself, that I felt like, oh yeah, no, there's something worthwhile here. There's something meaningful here. There's something that speaks to me, something kind of good. I don't know what it is. And then I thought about it. I went and I read Vedanya's book, Introducing Buddhism. I read the 3 Jewels. I started to listen to Sangharakshita's lectures, which in those days were in a tape library. You had to sign out and bring the tape home, if anyone remembers those days. And I thought about it, and I thought, yes, I agree. I really agree. So I remember reading the 3 Jewels and realizing that this was all I'd ever thought and more, you know, like Bhante was saying, all I'd ever thought. And then I'd turn the page and then there was a bit more than I'd thought. And so it accords to our reason and also experience. So you learn to meditate, you put the Buddhist teachings into practice and realize, yeah, they do work, actually. They do change me, you know, particularly I remember being profoundly moved to realize that meditation is something that works on the mind directly, and that I could directly develop love. I think I'd always been told that you should just be more loving. And here was a practice that actually helped me be more loving when I was angry and disappointed. So these are all important, our intuition, backed up by our reason, backed up by our experience. And it shows us, yes, there's something here, there's something worth following, there's something more that I can learn from here. So this is part of human nature, to respond to what is higher, to have an intuition of what's higher, and to be able to explore that in our reason and our experience. that process can be curtailed at some point in life. Sometimes there's that natural human faculty that's sort of growing and reaching towards the light, and something that can happen that can blunt it, particularly if people experience a lot of criticism or cynicism or disappointment in life, or even humiliation. That kind of gentle buds of Shraddha that are opening out into the light can be curtailed. So it's very important that if we see that happening, or if we've experienced that in ourselves, that we try and come back to that natural experience of Shraddha and never ever blunt it in someone else. It's a very beautiful thing to watch, very beautiful thing to watch in children and young adults, seeing them respond to what is higher and really encouraging that in others. So in a way, it's a faculty for ourselves, but it's a faculty for other people too. And in a way, we have a role to encourage that in others. Ask them questions, why does that move you? What is it about that moves you? What's important to you in that? And if you ask those kind of open questions, this little bud of Shraddha will further flourish, which is a delight. I have to say, teaching the Dharma and helping encourage faith is one of the real boons of existence as far as I'm concerned. So yes, that flame of Shraddha might be smothered on occasion, but it will never be put out. There's always an ember there that can be fanned. So yeah, so there is a role in Buddhism. Buddhism does, the higher values are found in their ultimate expression in Buddhism as the three jewels, as the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. So the Buddha represents the higher possibility of what we can become, who we can become in our fullness, developing limitless energy, limitless compassion, limitless wisdom. So that's what the Buddha represents. It represents a vision of the possibility of human consciousness. And the Dharma represents the truth and the way to realize the truth, the path to the truth. And the Sangha represents the community of those who are on that journey, on the journey towards truth. But it's interesting because in Buddhism, the three jewels are very much expressions of natural, universal, higher values. So they're not, the three jewels aren't higher values just because they're Buddhist. We don't say, well, I'm a Buddhist, therefore what I value is the Buddha and the Dharma and Sangha. No, you're part of life and humanity. And the three jewels represent something universal about humanity, because that potential of human consciousness is available to everyone, and is sort of, I hope this doesn't sound too contradictory, but is kind of known by everyone. There's something in everyone that will respond to those values, the value of the development of human consciousness and the truth and the community of people who are searching for the truth. So yes, the three jewels aren't higher values just because they're Buddhist. They're Buddhist because they're expressions of higher values. So yes, that was a long-winded way of saying, well, that faith isn't a grim allegiance to sort of one form of religious tradition. And faith isn't also necessarily a feeling of inspiration. Personally, I think inspiration is overvalued. My friend Chandra Prabhu's got a t-shirt from a quote from an artist which says on it, inspiration is for amateurs. And it's got quite a lot of controversy, particularly on the chairs event for the chairs of all the Buddhist centres. And she got quite interesting responses. I love that. I think we should all wear t-shirts that provoke debate, personally. But I know what that artist means. It means you can't always rely on a particular feeling of inspiration. I remember a friend of mine made a joke once. He said, those Buddhists, you have to be spiritually inspired to take out the dustbin. Sometimes, you're not really going to be inspired to take out the dustbin. You just got to take out the dustbin. Sometimes you're not really going to feel inspired to meditate. You just got to do it. And I know particularly for myself, actually, I think I entered the lockdown with this kind of naive sense that, well, I know how it is on retreat, and I've been on long retreats. therefore I'm going to be great on the lockdown. I'm going to be in such positive mental state. It's just like a retreat. And actually, no, that really isn't what happened. I felt myself feeling extremely dull a lot of the time, and with a low level of individual and collective anxiety. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So what do I do in these circumstances when my inspiration, I'm not feeling that kind of upward moving energy of inspiration in that sense? I have to rely on a much deeper sense of Shraddha, the kind of Shraddha that's a momentum of my being towards enlightenment, and trust in that. That even if I'm not feeling it in that particular moment, there is a deeper momentum. And I can look back on my life and I can see what choices I've made in my life. And I think, yes, there's a momentum towards enlightenment, and I just need to touch on that, no matter what I'm feeling at that particular moment. It's almost like I can imagine, like sometimes I think my spiritual life's like a great big tanker. And actually the whole thing is sort of shifting around towards enlightenment, deep in the sea. And then there's a kind of cocktail party happening on top of this tanker that's just full of like the usual kind of madness and, sort of anxiety, and when am I going to see my family again? When am I going to see my boyfriend again? Will I ever be able to go to a cafe? Blah, 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 blah. There's all this stuff going on top. Do I really want to be a Buddhist anyway? I don't know if I want to be a Buddhist anyway. It all sort of chatter that goes on top. There's like a kind of like a cocktail party, but the whole momentum is going solidly towards enlightenment, and I really do trust that. In fact, there's a story from the time of the Buddha where Mahanama says to the Buddha, I keep forgetting to meditate, and sometimes I just forget about the three jewels. I'm not the greatest Buddhist practitioner really, and I quite like that. I quite like that he went and told the Buddha he forgot about the three jewels quite a lot. Sometimes we just do, And the Buddha said, well, tell me, Mahanama, if a tree is leaning towards the east and it's chopped down, which way does it fall? And Mahanama says, well, it falls towards the east. And the Buddha says to him, well, so it is with you. You're leaning towards enlightenment. So sometimes I bring that to mind, and I think, yes, well, we're leaning towards enlightenment. There's a kind of momentum towards what is higher, even if we're not feeling particularly inspired at that moment. Even that little doubt that emerges in one's mind of like, oh, I'm not very good, I could be more ethical, or I could be a more authentic kind of truth searcher. I could read the Dharma more, I could meditate more, I could practice ethics more deeply. Even those questions means that we're moving towards enlightenment, because we care very deeply. It shows that we care very deeply about those things. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that in a sense, faith isn't always that exotic either. It's not something that's necessarily going to have the flavor of monks in robes and incense and exotic shrines and all those things that faith might conjure up. I always have this kind of image of someone that I should be, that I fall short of, which is sort of a very calm, sort of nun-like figure. And sometimes I doubt, that who am I to practice Buddhism? Who am I to, in a way, move towards the truth, move towards higher values? Maybe I'm just a bit superficial, and sometimes it's easy to think oneself a bit of a fraud sometimes. So I was having these kind of doubts, particularly in the lockdown. I thought, well, who am I to say I'm an order member? Who am I to say I'm going for refuge to the three jewels? And I talked to my preceptor, and she said, you're going to have a dream tonight that's going to answer that. So I went to bed with my little teddy bear, waiting for the dream to happen. And lo and behold, it did. And the dream was that I was in this kind of, I was somewhere in Central America, and there was this kind of sacred site, but it was a tourist trap. There were lots and lots of tourists there from all over the world. There were lots of trinkets for sale, all these kind of, trappings, and lots of new age people talking in a way I didn't really understand what they were talking about. And I felt a bit lost in all of this. And this Native American woman, Indigenous American woman, came up to me and she said, look, I know that this place is full of tourists and trinkets and it doesn't feel very deep. But she said it is actually a sacred site. And then she started to rub the floor. And for some reason, I turned around to her and I said, don't underestimate the spiritual potential of Westerners. And then she sent me for an initiation. And the initiation was I was going to go into a sauna. And I was in this kind of municipal changing room. It was just a bit like going to the swimming pool or something like that. And I was in this whole state about whether I should go in naked into the sauna or whether I should be clothed. And in the end, I decided I'd wear a sarong. So I went into this sauna, and then there was just this middle-aged man in his box shorts from somewhere around sort of, I don't know, Central or South America. And it was just totally ordinary. And he just welcomed me. Oh, hello, sit down. So there was me in my sarong and him in his boxer shorts. And then I kind of woke up. But I think what it said to me was two things. One of them is that sometimes Westerners, because we associate faith with the East, we think that we're not necessarily, we think of our own culture as being consumerist. And part of that's true. But actually, don't underestimate the spiritual potential of Westerners, and don't underestimate the spiritual potential of oneself, of ourselves. That we're here for a reason. Something spoke to us. Something suggested something higher. And we found that met in the Buddhist teachings. And that's why we're spending our Tuesday evening having a Zoom Sangha group in Sheffield Buddhist Centre. Something spoke to us, and that's worth taking seriously. And you don't have to wait to become a monk in robes to take that seriously. In a way, the initiation might be quite ordinary. It might be a middle-aged man in his boxer shorts and me in my sarong, It doesn't have to be with a whole kind of trapping. Really don't underestimate your own practice. I think that's very important. So this is what faith is and what it isn't. It's not an allegiance to a particular religious form. It's not necessarily a feeling of inspiration, and it's not necessarily that exotic. What it is a wholehearted response to what's good and true and beautiful. And that comes traditionally in 3 forms, which are going to be explored next week. So the first form, just to kind of give you a sense of them, the first form is confident faith. So this is when we know it's true. We know we have sometimes it's called confidence, trust. We trust this is true. We trust with our mind, we trust with our intellect, but it's something much more than even that. We believe it. In a world where there's so much conflicting advice, there's so much pressure to be someone and to think particular things, to have certain opinions, a lot of pressure sometimes to have particular opinions about things and particular ideas. That in the lockdown, I know there's been a lot of pressure at the beginning at least, which was, we're all going to learn a new instrument and a new language. We've got to be successful at charity work while at the same time homeschooling children at the same time as holding down our jobs. And and also keeping a positive emotional state while you're doing all these things. There's an incredible amount of information that's coming at us all the time, particularly through social media and the internet. And sometimes it's quite difficult to know what to believe or what to do or what to think. And through all of that, the truth comes like a sword. And sometimes you just hear something and you think, I know that's true. It's almost like I think a lot of the thoughts that are preoccupations and anxieties and turning around in my head, they almost happen at a different part of my being. There's lots of ideas that happen around here. They happen around my head, sort of whirring around, thoughts and ideas and opinions and views and what I should be thinking, but I'm not sure that I do think that. And it sort of comes as a sort of pressure up here. But when I hear the truth, the thoughts almost feel like they're taking place in a different part of my body. They take place in my belly. Not by hatred. Is hatred ever pacified in this world? It is pacified by love. You know, when I heard that from those lines from the Dhammapada, that was not a thought spinning around my head. I didn't just start thinking, oh, that's an interesting idea. You know, oh, well, I wonder if we can apply it to this situation or that situation. No, it sunk deeply. You know, like all the things that you heard on Dharma Day that really, really touched people. That wasn't a kind of thought that whizzed around in an intellectual fashion. It goes into the belly, it goes into the bones. This is true. So that's part of faith. Something cuts through, and we're convinced. The second form of faith is loving or lucid faith, which is when we hear the truth, we must love it. And that gives rise to a certain emotion. In Buddhism, this emotion is called pramodya. Sometimes it's translated as joy. I think it's not quite joy in that way. I don't think it's always happiness. I think it's the ease that comes when we know that there's something worth fighting for, when we know that there's something worth living for. You know, it is a question. What is our lives about? What are we to do with our lives? What's the purpose of our lives? And something comes through. We have a glimmer of a potential of human consciousness. We have a glimmer of a higher value, kindness, wisdom, love, forgiveness, all those things we feel are possible. And it gives us something that's worth fighting for. And that is such a precious gift, to know that there's something worth living for, worth fighting for, worth practicing, really worth putting in the effort for, is a relief. It's a release. Okay, we know what path we're on. We don't know in what way that path is going to unfold. We don't know the next step even always. We don't know what's going to look like in the end, but we know there's a path. It might be difficult, but we know it's there. There is kindness, there's truth, there's optimism. And, you know, sometimes faith is said to arise out of dukkha, it arises out of an experience of suffering. And it's not that, you know, one experiences suffering, therefore faith arises. It's that we reflect on suffering. We reflect on why suffering arises and what it consists in. And that gives rise to faith. Faith that there's a different possibility. And then there's this ease. It's like we found paradise in the dust of the street. We know that there's something in dukkha, through dukkha, a possibility of release and freedom. And that is such a boon, such a relief. There's also longing faith. When we know what's possible, we long for it. I was having a little email conversation with Vidanya about this, because he originally called this talk your future self, something about the future self calling you, that faith is like your future self calling you. And it's interesting because I think that's true, but I don't think it's your future. It doesn't feel like your future self. It doesn't feel like in a limiting way. It's not just like me, Vajratara, much wiser and kinder and possibly better looking, you know, calling me into the future, or some sort of old crone saying this way, this way. It's not really about me. It's much more mysterious than that. It's me, but it's not me. It's something bigger than me. Traditionally in Buddhism, this kind of longing faith would be talked about as, in the stories of Buddhism, as the gods and goddesses, the devas, come and whisper to you in the middle of the night, talking to you about the qualities of the Buddha. And that's what that feels like. That's what's calling me, is my own Buddhahood is calling me, which is me, and it's not me. It's not just a refined version of myself. It's something much bigger than I can even imagine right now. And this longing faith can be experienced as something quite painful. It can be experienced as the pain of, why am I not one of the noble ones? But of course, within that is a glimmer that we can be one of the noble ones. Why am I not one of the noble ones? ah, yes, but that is a possibility. I can be one of the noble ones. In a way, I can't go back. There's sometimes a feeling that once we've glimpsed higher values, we've had a response to those higher values, we can't ignore them. You know, I got walking around Brockwell Park recently, this is where I grew up, and looking at people on a sunny Saturday afternoon drinking beer in the park, and I was feeling, oh, I'd quite like to go with a group of friends drinking beer in the park. But those days are kind of gone. I'm not that person anymore. I can't go back to those days. I'm me, and there's a possibility. There's a emergence of something that I can be as well. And of course, that gives rise to action. You know, if we really have a sense of what's possible for ourselves, then we want to put in the steps to move towards what's possible. So that longing faith is to do, sometimes it's called, it's to do with volition, it's to do with will, even the guts. So yeah, so just to sum up, faith is much more than a feeling, much more than a feeling of inspiration. It's much more than Buddhism. It's a natural human faculty of response to what is higher whenever we come across it. And it whispers to us of something more, whispers to us of who we could be. And it's a total response. It's a total response of confident faith, of the mind, of lucid faith, of the heart, and of longing faith, of volitional, the guts, action itself. And when we have that glimmer, the trick is, in all of it, is to trust it, is to follow it. And if we can do that, then something that we've never even imagined was possible will come into being.